Do the sex.
Today's Talk Sex with Annette topic is how to come out poly and not wreck your life. So you've realized you're poly, or at least you're not wired for monogamy the way Disney promised you would be. Congratulations, you're finally a walking permission slip for radical love. But now comes the scary part, telling your partners, your friends, your parents, and surviving when Aunt Kathy clutches her pearls. That's why I'm bringing in the big guns today. Emily Lambert Robbins, a licensed clinical social worker, certified sex therapist, and a powerhouse therapist helping people own their love lives without apology, is here to help us out. She's going to walk us through the messy, magical process of coming out poly with your sanity and your sex life intact. But before we dive in, I want to remind you guys that I'm over on OnlyFans, and there I'm sharing my sex and intimacy how-tos and demonstrations, along with audio-guided self-pleasure meditations and so much more to help you elevate your intimate life starting tonight. So you can find me there under the handle at Talk Sex with Annette. You can also find me on Substack, same handle. But if you want a really easy way to find me everywhere you want to find me, you just scroll down to the notes in this episode, and all of the links are there. So come join me. Emily, will you take a moment to introduce yourself to my listeners and tell them just a little bit more about you before we launch into this conversation?
Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Lambert Robbins. As Annette said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker based out of New York City. I have a private practice for the past 10 years where I've been working with couples and individuals. I'm an Imago couples therapist and a AASECT certified sex therapist. So I really love working with couples and individuals, helping them have the relationships they love and want, being their authentic selves in their life and relationships, having a sex life that makes them happy, and breaking down a lot of the shame. I'm a former attorney turned therapist, a little career changer. I'm a Jersey girl from New Jersey. I live in Manhattan right now, live in the Upper West Side. I'm entirely virtual in my practice. I see people in New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey right now. I also run couples retreats, and those are all over. People from all over the country and the world can come to those in person.
So if you've ever wondered, am I poly or just bad at monogamy? You're going to want to stay right here because you're going to get some clarity on that. And also, you are going to get guidance in how to go from thinking you might be poly or starting to practice to coming out and being able to live authentically, which is what most of us want to do, right? Like life is much better when you aren't hiding the most important parts of you. So stay to the end because, of course, as always, we're going to give you that go bag of tools to start living more authentically, stripping your life of shame, and figuring out how to come out as poly to your loved ones. I'm ready to launch into it. How about you, Emily?
That sounds great. Let's do it.
Let's talk about coming out poly. Let's launch into it. Emily, what's the biggest facepalm mistake people make when they come out as poly?
I think the biggest facepalm mistake that I've seen from clients or other, friends, people in my life has been not really thinking through the potential consequences of what some of the risks could be in coming out. Because it is coming out as poly is risky. And for some people, it could actually be fine, not really any bumps. But for other people, coming out poly they could suffer really meaningful losses, in their life, loss of family relationships, loss of friendships, losing a job, right? So I think that's the biggest thing is really having to, before you're, and it can feel like you want to be your authentic self, right? And not live in secrecy, right? And that's for a lot of people the driving force behind a lot of this, why they want to be able to be who they are fully, but really having to think through what would be some of the potential negative consequences if I do come out. And that's something that I always talk to my clients about, really thinking through that. And also thinking like, who are safe people in my life to come out to? Because unfortunately, poly is not something that is protected when it comes to the laws in our country for discrimination, things like that. And there's a lot of stigma around it, unfortunately. I think it's gotten a lot better in our country, but there's still a lot of stigma and a lot of I would say, bias around monogamy, right, as the norm. And, so there's no legal protection for this, right? So that means it's possible to lose your job, right? You could face discrimination around child custody potentially and adoption, right? There's real consequences to it. So I think being able to really like talk that through, whether it's a therapist, really think about it before you do. I know that's
Right.
heavy, but it's the reality, right? Like if thinking about, our the day and age we're in too.
Well, I was going to say, especially right now, as far as discrimination protections go under the new administration, there just are fewer and fewer protections for anything that doesn't align with very conventional ideas of what relationship and love should look like and sexuality, right? So it's
Exactly.
probably feels even more risky today than it did yesterday.
I know. I know. It's like if you're not in like a hetero, male female marriage having like 6 babies, right? It's like that's what we're going for now, I guess, in the current
Indeed.
climate.
Yeah. Listeners know I live in Portland. And for
Yeah.
me, people being poly or non-monogamous is just I
Mm.
I don't assume anybody's monogamous anymore. That's not an assumption that I have. So, but I have to remember that I am in a bubble. Like that is not how it is everywhere else. Because I'm always shocked when I go everywhere else and people are like poly, what is that? Isn't that just for freaks? I'm like, no, like people, all kinds of people are no longer monogamous and a lot of people just hide it. And these are
Yeah.
all kinds of people, rich people, poor people, alternative people, normal people. So,
Right. I'm also in a bubble in New York City. It's, very, I would say, accepted, right? All different types of communities and people here. But that's not the reality for some of my friends. So my clients in other parts of even the state I live in, right? In upstate New York or wherever it is.
right. So it's been said that coming out as poly is often harder than coming out queer. Why do you think that is? And is that true?
Yeah, I actually have heard that from clients too that are queer, right? That like this is actually, or they've come out as lots of different identities that are maybe marginalized, but coming out as poly, people have I've talked to said this is the hardest thing to come out as actually for them. For some people, because I think there is so much stigma around it and misunderstanding around it too. Even I think it was maybe the other day, I was in like a Facebook group and someone was talking about something and they even said they talked about polyamory, and someone said, "Oh, you mean that's the thing where you have multiple wives, like polygamy?" I'm like, "No, oh, so even you gotta like correct me, but there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot, like I said, of misunderstanding. Oh, that means you just want to have sex with a million people. Well, maybe, or maybe not, right? Or maybe that's not how poly looks for you. So I think that it's just like there's a lot of emotional labor that comes with coming out as poly because you have so much explaining to do for people, and that could be exhausting
Right. So,
and like defend almost like your lifestyle or like that it's legit and that it's healthy.
right. And that education piece, feeling like you have to do that education piece every time you talk about your life and relationship, which can be exhausting, right?
Yeah, I think that's what makes it hard because I think even the conversation around poly, I think it's gotten a lot better around ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, the past few years only. Really, it's this has start to been more mainstream in a way, like talked about. Whereas coming out in other identities, such as being gay or queer, that's I think been maybe kind of a little bit earlier. That was talked about more. So we're just kind of like catching up now in terms of, like, polyamory being something people talk about, if that makes sense.
Yes, for sure. For sure. So, for someone who's freaking out right now, what is the first conversation they should have before they tell anyone else?
Well, I always I guess maybe I'm biased, I'm a therapist, but I always think it's great to talk to a therapist, a trusted therapist about this, where they might be pathologized for being polyamorous as, "Oh, is that a sex addiction?" Or are you just, like, you can't be monogamous, as that's a bad thing? So it's actually looking for a therapist who's poly friendly, who's gonna be works with this population, I think is important. First of all, I think the first part of the conversation is really with yourself. Number one is thinking about, why is this important to me to let people know about this part of myself? Like getting clear on, what does this mean for is it an identity for you, right? Is it a lifestyle, right? What is it about poly? I think getting clear with it for yourself, like, why is it that this is a part of me? What is important that people know about this for me? Like with anything, what would I want someone to know? And then thinking through, like I said, some of the negative consequences, the potential downsides, and also thinking through, what are some of the negative downsides to not coming out, right? Like thinking about, if I don't tell people, right, about this, about myself, it's hard to keep secrets, right? And when we keep secrets, that often perpetuates a lot of shame, right? And there's a certain kind of grief, when you're not able to be the authentic version of you. Like I think you were saying in the beginning, like really be your authentic self and live openly as that. So thinking about that too, the negative consequence of coming out, also the negative consequences if I don't, right? And also thinking about, coming out doesn't have to mean coming out to every single person in your world, right? It could be coming out to a few safe people, right? Maybe that first, or maybe that's all you do, right? So it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like I'm either out posting my Facebook status, telling my Aunt Judy, at Thanksgiving, or nothing. No, it could be maybe I tell a few friends who I know are very non-judgmental, who I know that aren't going to shame me for this, or going to be ask questions, but in a curious way, not like a judgy way.
Right. So sitting down with a therapist could be good for figuring out those things like, uh, do I need to come out? And then
Yeah.
who am I going to come out with, and who all needs to know, and why am I making this decision for myself?
Really thinking about what you want to share with them about this. You think about, like, do I want to share them about my journey in coming out as, you're discovering I was poly, or what's your experience been like with that? Do you want to share that? What drew you to this? Like, do you feel like it's part of your identity? Why is it meaningful to you? What adds to your life? Are there anything that's hard about it? Right?
And I would imagine as you accumulate partners, depending on the seriousness of those partners, because in poly relationships, some partners are more like, quote, full-time partners than others who may not ever really be interested in or in a relationship with you where they meet the parents or they really
Mm.
integrate fully into your everyday life. Whereas you have some partners who are or become those everyday life partners, maybe even nesting partners, meaning they live with you, right?
If you're in, like you said, depending on the type of relationships that you're in, you might be in like a triad, right? Or like a polycule, or maybe you live with multiple partners, right? Or maybe you have a nesting partner or a primary partner, but then you have a very serious relationship with someone else. It makes things like family events or holidays can be very stressful, right? Because what do you do? Do you bring your other partner to Thanksgiving and say they're a friend? Or do you sleep in a separate bedroom? People can feel like, quite, it can feel unsettling. Let's say you have a very important partner in your life, yet you can't bring them to events, or you feel like you have to be like, oh, this is just my friend. So I think that could be really hard for people to navigate if they're not able to be out about, hey, these are my two partners and we all live together and we're all romantically involved.
Right. It's figuring out how much you can tell. And then if you've got two partners you're living with, then it's like you have to figure out how to come out enough, assuming that's what everybody wants, which brings me to my next
Mhm.
question. Let's talk partners. What if you want to come out poly, but your current partner thought they signed up for monogamy? What
Mm.
then? So I know from personal experience a lot of people who go from a monogamous structure to wanting polyamory. So
Mm.
let's start with that conversation.
Yeah. I've actually worked with a lot of couples where this is the case, or maybe they've been in a monogamous marriage or relationship for many years, one partner may or both, but usually it's one who kind of instigates the topic like, "Hey, I think I want to try this." Right? Or it might come off on sometimes I've seen on the heels of like after infidelity of many years. And then maybe that has surfaced and then the person's like, "Look, I don't think I could actually really do monogamy. I don't think this is really for me." And then it's also like then you're healing from that as well. And I think that so like I said, I've worked with a lot of couples on this, and I think it's, really exploring, helping people explore again the motivations around this. Like, it's changing your relationship structure and how the identity of you guys as a monogamous couple, right? And then like all of a sudden changing that. And like, what does that mean? What would be some of the benefits to changing your relationship or becoming polyamorous? What are some challenges that might come up? Talking through that. What are some for the person who may be more reluctant? Like, what are some of the fears there? Is this something that where they want to stretch into? And I've seen that where people maybe are more reluctant or that's supposed to be something they would choose for themselves, but they want to stay with their partner and they want to support their partner. So they're open to trying it, right? Even if it may not be something that they themselves would do on their own. So I think, being able to start having these conversations, they're really hard, right? Because and a lot of people I see are really, maybe they grew up with a very like monogamy framework, right? So like really turning that on its head and thinking about, wow, like we've been monogamous 20 years and now all of a sudden we're not going to be. It's like a big mindset shift. I think so. There's a lot to talk about around that and around the grief and the loss of the old relationship too, right? And also processing some of if there was someone acting as if they were in an open relationship, but it wasn't open, like there was infidelity and things like that. I think then also healing from that has to happen.
Right. So, sitting down and having that conversation, how would you open it with your partner if you're starting to feel like you want to try a different model? What would your suggestion be for launching into that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think leading with, always like I say, I do Imago couples therapy, and we have something called the Imago dialogue, which is like a really beautiful way of communicating and listening to each other, where you're sharing really, as we call it, the sender, the person who's sharing. You first make an appointment with your partner, so it's like make checking to see if they're available, right, to have a conversation. So it'd be like, "Hey, I wanna talk about I've been thinking about, something that has been coming up for me around how I'm viewing relationships or how I'm viewing what I want out of our relationship or out of my life, something around like thinking about monogamy or different ways we could approach this. Like, is now a good time to talk about that and see if they're in the space, the partners in the space. And then I think avoiding, like we say in Imago, the nuclear weapons, the blaming, the criticism. I mean, we know this all, but then like sometimes in the moment we could go to it, right? Be like, well, I'm not getting what I need from you, or our sex life isn't good, so I want to do this. It's probably it's gonna go over that well, right? Like, so sticking to onto the I, right? So like, I'm feeling like I've been thinking a lot about wanting to explore something, or maybe I read something about polyamory, and it spoke to me, about how I want to maybe approach our romantic relationship, and it sounds really appealing, and this is why, and this is what comes up for me about this, why I would like it. So, like, speaking from your feelings, your experiences, instead of, like, putting on criticizing the partner or, coming from a place of, like, like a lack in the relationship, if that makes sense.
Right. The second option there is going to go over way better than the first
Well,
option with the blaming, because then it just sounds like I'm dissatisfied with this relationship. So I'm trying to find somebody else and basically get permission rather than kind of talking about it as how it could be a good experience for both of you to do together. Would you say, and I don't want to get off our topic too much, but that it's a good idea to initiate these kind of conversations, especially if there's been infidelity, before you've healed the infidelity? Or do you think that it's critical to work through that before you make that kind of decision?
I wouldn't say it has to be, like, linear like that. I wish I mean, I think in an ideal world, maybe, right? It would be like, "Okay, we healed, we worked through that, and now we're approaching this." I guess maybe because when people come to me, I think life is, like a beautiful mess, you know what I mean? So a lot of times, maybe we've healed some, and we're also talking about becoming poly, and we're in that work doing that, and then we have to go back and heal more, right? So it's never to me, it's not always so perfect, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I think it's okay because I think the healing it's a process, you know?
Yes. So, on the topic of partners, let's say you have been poly for a little while and you have a couple of partners, and you get to the point where you feel like for yourself, being able to be open about being poly is the healthiest route to go. You feel the need to tell your family, at least, and some friends, and your partner or partners, even if it's just one of them, does not want to come out openly as poly. How do you navigate those conversations?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think, really having a conversation where you're able or probably many conversations, not just one, but where you're really able to, like we say in Imago, like, listen dialogically. So we're like, we have conversation where we call it more like a monologue. If one person talks and the other person's waiting for their time to interrupt and put their point of view, right? And in Imago, couples therapy, we're like, wait, one person sends and the other person really just mirrors, just listens and reflects back what they're saying. And I think in this kind of situation, it would be a lot of that, dialoguing, where one person really speaks on why it's important to come out as poly, right? And the other partner just reflects back and listens deeply so they can go in their partner's world and understand why it's important and be able to validate and empathize with them. And then the other partner can be able to share, here's why I really don't want to come out or why I'm really
Right.
scared about that. And like through, but only through like connection and through that deep listening, I think, is there then ability to figure out what to do. Right. So I think that's really important how we talk about it. As the type of couples work I do, it's through this awesome process of dialoguing, deeply listening, and changing how we listen. I think
Right.
that would start from there. And then once you know more, maybe you hear more about why it's so important for your partner to come out. Maybe you start to shift, right? Maybe the partner's like, wow, I hear this. You feel like, if you don't come out, this is going to be really just perpetuate this feeling of shame for you or, that you've experienced for a lot of your life. And maybe then there's a shift and like, okay, well, maybe what if you just come out to a few friends that are going to be really supportive, right? Maybe I can live with that, but let's not post it on Facebook, or then you might start, or maybe not, but there's at least there's an option. There's like more of an opportunity there, and then you're able to hear your partner's fear. Hey, I'm worried about losing my job if we come out, right? Or I'm worried about losing custody of my kid, right? And then be able to hear that, "Okay, well, of course I don't want that to happen, so how can we make sure that if I do come out to people, like, that's not gonna be in jeopardy," right?
Right. You can plan together
Yeah, like,
for
and I think
ways that can work and ways that don't, right?
it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can come out to select people, like I said, safe people. Doesn't have to be to the world if you don't want it to be.
Right. So it sounds like there's a lot of strategic planning in coming out poly, depending on, where you live and the risks that there are. So it sounds like to me, one of the very first thing is a risk assessment
Mhm.
for everybody involved.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I see as a therapist. First, my job is really to help people sort through the negative consequences, right, of coming out and the risks, and then also the risks of not coming out, right?
Hmm. So if you could design the dream script for someone's first coming out convo, what would it sound like?
Oh, wow. That's That's a good question. I'm trying to think because I think that's going to be so dependent on the person. But I think I'm just gonna say what it comes to my mind for it. So I'm just gonna say, I want you to know something about me. This is something that I'm sharing with you because I really value you and our relationship, right? There's a part about me that you don't know. And I feel it would be really great for you to know this part because I value our relationship. I think it would strengthen our relationship if you know this. I understand you may not understand this and there might be questions that I'm open to answer. There's a part about me and is that I identify as polyamorous. And I think from there, explaining what does that mean for you? What does that look like? Or what's your journey been? That's really dependent on the person, right? Like I said, polyamory can look so many different ways, right? You could be married and look to the outside like a monogamous couple, but maybe you actually have another really serious partner, right? Or maybe you're solo poly, right? And you aren't living with anyone or aren't married and you have many relationships, but maybe they're more primary partner, right? Or maybe you're polyamorous and you're with a primary partner, but you're not dating anyone else at the time, right? But you still identify as poly. It's still a part of who you are. So I think it's like sharing with them what does poly mean to you, like in your life? Like this is what it looks like in my life. And this is why it's meaningful to me. And maybe a little bit of your story of like a journey with it when I
Yeah.
maybe realized this is something in my that, maybe for some people it might be in their 20s, right? Or their teens and they're like, you know, it's interesting because when I talk to like teenagers now, like 15, 16-year olds now, they're having these conversations with their friends. Hey, I might be polyamorous, or maybe I'm asexual. When I was growing up, people didn't even come out as gay.
Mm.
I'm an older millennial, so there wasn't even that talk. So it's cool. Now it's very accepting. But again, it depends on where you live
Right.
as
Yeah,
well.
no, I think the youth here obviously are the concept of poly is like old to them. They're like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I might
Oh,
be. It does not stress them out at all, which is interesting to see how people, I think older, well, millennials and up were still locked in. We remember conventional living and the danger around it. And Gen Z is really interesting to me because they already know about all this stuff. And it's like they treat it almost like it's annoying, like, who cares? Whatever. Even when it comes to the concept of cheating, they seem to be a lot more like, yeah, people have, I mean, probably because all their parents were trying to be monogamous and cheating on each other and getting caught. But like, let's
right.
be honest, like, I don't actually know a monogamous married couple either from my parents' generation or beyond. Where there hasn't been infidelity, I suspect I know one couple who maybe hasn't cheated on some level, but who knows? I don't know anybody who hasn't been in a monogamous relationship where there's been cheating. So I feel like with Gen Z growing up with that and them knowing, like we all think kids don't know, but they all know. They're just kind of like, yeah, people are people and make mistakes and so probably polyamory makes more sense to them. They're like, yeah, just be real, please. And I do see kids like regardless of what our current administration wants to do, and I think even regardless of how much of a setback there is, Gen Z is coming and they do not give two fucks. They're like, I think they're more apt to insist on living authentically. And they know there are options out there. And you cannot take the knowledge of options away from people, right? Once you
Exactly.
know.
You know.
So,
Yeah. I have a couple I worked with that had teenage kids, like 18, 17, around that age. And they came out to their kids, that they were monogamous. Now they're going to be polyamorous. And the kids' reaction was more like, all right, cool. What's for dinner?
yeah, I've gone through iterations of I've been monogamous, I've been in an open relationship. I've kind of played with a moment in poly world where I would say it would be defined as polyamorous. And
Mhm.
now I'm like trying to figure out what I want my future to look like. But my kids, I have 3 kids. And one thing that I haven't done is I haven't hidden everything from them. I've just been kind of like, yeah, this is where we're at. Your dad and I are at, or where I'm at now. And they're kind of like, oh, cool. All right. They don't
Right.
like, they don't care. Just like, oh, okay.
Like,
As
pretty much.
long as I'm there and loving them and raising them and taking care of them, right? They just want me to be happy. And also it gives them permission to have
Yeah.
options. So,
Cool is that, right? To be able to
eh,
like model that for your kids and be like, look, you can like life doesn't have to look like one way, right? And that's what's so
mm,
cool. There's options for you.
mm,
Like I'll like there's not the because kids know, even if you don't I think people don't tell kids, but like you said, maybe generations above us, right? Like maybe the parents were monogamous, but kids know if there was stuff going on, right? And I think if you
um,
parent that's living authentically and happy, like that's number one, right? They have a
mm,
happy mom. I have a 14-month-old daughter, so my daughter's a little young for any kind of conversations like that, but, I want her to see me as happy and living true to myself. Hopefully, that will inspire her too.
it gives them permission
Yeah.
to have the life they want and make decisions for themselves. So, what is the wildest or weirdest reaction you've ever heard someone get after coming out as poly?
Well, I think it was one of the ones I told you about in the beginning of the interview, which is where they said, "Oh, like, that means you like the Mormons, like, you have multiple wives, or you're like, like big love or whatever, like that kind of thing." They think we're, like, living on a compound, like, okay, like and you have, like, a million wives, that kinda thing. I think people, like, sensationalize it like that. I think that's probably, like, one of the weirdest reactions. Another one that is kinda like, I think a reaction that people get that is weird, but also kind of funny in a weird way is like, "Oh, does that you must be, like, bagging a million people." Right? "You must be having sex every night of the week. Oh, you don't also have a job and kids and a mortgage and stuff like that." It's like, "You just having sex all the time." It's like, "Oh, well, maybe someone is, but also maybe not." A lot of it's like, we're still regular people, you know?
Right. Like, yeah, this idea that there's just sex parties going on every night and
Monday night. It's like
it's Monday night. There's
Monday
no
night
sex
sex
party
party.
tonight.
Like, well, maybe I'll put my kid to bed and making dinner and going to bed at 9, you know? Like,
Right.
but yeah,
Right.
it's like just normal people.
So you've named a couple, but is there another prevalent myth about polyamory that you hear all the time that you wish you could just squash, put an end to officially?
I think I named the biggest ones or that it all is the same for everyone one in terms of like poly means looks the same for everyone. I think that's a big myth because it doesn't, right? What you want out of polyamorous relationships is the same, right? People can want many different things, right? Some people are really looking a lot for deep emotional connection and want maybe only one or two partners. Other people, maybe it's more about sex and more about the physical. For other people, they really want maybe have a primary partner. Other people, they're relationship anarchists and they don't want any hierarchy. And all of this can be polyamory. So I think knowing that it's not just like one way of doing this. And I think another thing that's important to know is that for a lot of people, I think being polyamorous is an identity that they almost as if like, people you're like, "Hey, I realize I'm queer," right? And that's a part of my identity. This becomes part of people's identity and not something necessarily that they knew really early on that this actually feels right to them before they can even put into words. That actually, I think this is who I am.
I think there are people who actually identify as their relationship style becomes an identity, and that some people feel like, look, I'm just wired for monogamy. I can't. And I would say to those people, well, first you got to make sure that you're wired for monogamy and you're not programmed for monogamy, because of course we're programmed from day one in this society. But I do think there are people who are just like, this one person is enough for me. Anything more sounds miserable. And there are some people who are like, no, like I can just tell, like I'm someone who can love multiple people and have multiple relationships in my life. And I like that. And then there's a new term that has come out that I do want to dive into in a podcast episode itself called, I believe it's ambyamory, where someone can feels like they can be either. Like I can do monogamy and I can do polyamory. I identify with just one, but I think
Yeah,
I can move between them both. And it's more and more common that people are looking at their relationship style preference as an actual identity, as you would look at your sexuality, right?
exactly. Exactly. And I actually haven't heard of the term. Is it MBM? It's cool. I mean, I think it's just also shows like there's fluidity, right? Like we're not, we're evolving. We're always evolving. And depending on our life, depending on circumstances, like, like you don't have to, there's flexibility, you know?
Right. Like you might start out as monogamous with somebody, and then the two of you realize, hey, we've created this really secure connection. Maybe we want to open up a little and see what that looks like,
Yeah.
especially if you think about how long we live now and how long relationships last now. People were into monogamy when you died at 35, right? You had
Right.
maybe 10 years of marriage, maybe
Doable, right? It's like, all right, I'm living at 35, 10 years of monogamy. All right. I guess I could do that,
15, 20, 30. Like, come on.
But now we're living to what, 90s? Hopefully, right?
Knock on wood. Yeah,
Hopefully
that's
not
what we're trying to do, and we're banging all the way to death. Like, people are having sex well into their 70s and 80s, right?
as they
So,
should. Yeah.
as
And
they
to think
should.
about doing that with one person the rest of your life can feel, for a lot of people, maybe not what they want, or maybe
Right,
that sounds like, I don't know about that.
right. So, we've talked about the risks, but what I would like to look at next is what's the biggest gift you've seen come out of people living openly as poly?
I've seen there's this term in Imago couples therapy that is called joyful aliveness. And the idea is that we're all born fully whole, like fully who we need to be, joyfully alive, right? And then as we go through life, certain things dim that aliveness, certain traumas or experiences. And part of the journey of life is to reclaim that joyful aliveness. And when I've seen people be able to come out, and be their authentic selves and live fully in that way, I see such joyful aliveness. Like it's amazing, seeing people become just lighter, happier, and it's like could almost be like sometimes a whole new person that you see emerge. When the weight of the shame or the secrecy has been weighing someone down for a long time and then they're out and feeling like they're living their truth. That's a beautiful thing, and I,
Right.
I think it could be an amazing transformation and bring a lot of joy to people. And also seeing people accept them and love them. What an experience to be like, this is who I am, and have people embrace that. That's the ideal, right? To have people embrace it and be like, I love you. And that's awesome. I'm so happy for you. Like, that's amazing. If you could have that experience.
We've talked about the risks, we've talked about the gifts. Before we go, can you give my listeners, let's say there's some out there tonight, they're ready to either come out to their partner or their family. Where do they start? What are some things they can start doing tonight, tomorrow, this week to live more authentically? What would your roadmap
Mm.
be?
I think first, maybe sitting with yourself, and maybe writing down a little bit about, reflecting on your own journey, a romantic journey and journey to like realizing you're poly, and thinking about what that's looked like for you, thinking about maybe what polyamory has given you or what you if it's not something that maybe you've explored yet but want to explore, like why you want to do this, right? Why you want to explore this and really start to like just kind of like journal or think about it, right? And then think about who is someone that I feel I could start to share this with, really some of these thoughts I'm having. And I would say pick like one person, right, that feels safe to you, that maybe that is your partner, right? Or maybe that's your therapist, or maybe that's a best friend, and start to have the conversation with them and see how that feels. I don't know about you, but I'm honored if someone comes to me like, hey, I want to share something that I haven't told anyone else.
All right, guys, there you go. You know where your starting point is. So now, Emily, can you tell everybody where they can find you if, they want to reach out to you for some guidance or to find out more about what you do?
Sure, you can find me at my website, emilylambertrobbins.com. The website is the best way to reach me. You could reach out through me there. I have a newsletter. I also run free monthly webinars on Imago couples therapy. You can find out information about my couples retreats, more about the work I do. And yeah, I would that's the best place to start.
So, folks, coming out as poly isn't just a conversation, it's a revolution inside your life, your relationships, and the way you claim your pleasure. Huge thanks to Emily for giving us a roadmap and the real talk we all need. I want to remind you if you guys are looking for an intimacy coach or cheerleader in your own self pleasure journey, my books are open right now, and you can find out more about that at talksexwithanette.com. If you have questions about what you've heard in this episode or viewed in this episode, if you're on my YouTube channel, which is at Talk Sex with Annette, you can just drop your comment below the video. You can also reach out to me directly at Annette at talksexwithanette.com. You can scroll down to the notes below and you will find my speak pipe. You can send me a voice message and I will do my best to get all of your questions answered as soon as possible. Emily, thank you again for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
It was. And until next time, folks, I'll see you in the locker room. Cheers.
Cheers.